Geography and climate. Ancient Egypt was mostly desert. Its geographical features provided the civilization advantages. The desert gave Egyptians protection from invaders, while the Nile provided Egyptians a way of living. With the Nile, Egyptians were able to farm crops. This was because of the annual floods of the Nile. Farmers used irrigation for their crops. Through irrigation, they produced their primary crops, wheat and barley, but they also grew cotton. Farmers kept only a portion of their crops. Ancient Egypt's climate was always sunny, never having a day of snow. The north winds allowed Egyptians to travel down the river, while the south to north flow allowed them to travel up the river. The Nile wasn't only used for farming, but also a way of trade and transportation. This was also a way that the government kept the country tightly knit together. Religion. Egypt had a polytheistic religion, meaning they had many gods. Among the gods were Isis and Osiris. Even the pharaohs were considered gods themselves. The most important god of all the Egyptian gods, though, is Amen, or Amun-Ra. Amun-Ra is the creator god. His symbol is the sun. This can also be found on top of his head, like a headdress in statues or drawings of him. Egyptians believed in life after death. They mummified bodies, like pharaohs and other very important peoples. This process was called mummification. Through mummification, the body is preserved for thousands of years. The body's organs would be removed and also preserved. After all, how will you live without a tummy or a heart? Salt would be placed in the body to make it more lifelike and to preserve it. Scientists today, though, have done experiments to find another way the mummies were mummified. The body then would go through a series of wrappings and placed in coffins and a sarcophagus. If you were the rich and healthy, like the pharaoh, items would be placed in the tomb, like statues or servants, games, furniture, everything you would think they need after they died. The person's heart then would be judged in the afterlife, weighed against the sacred feather, which was a symbol of the truth. If the heart passes, it can enter eternal happiness. If it fails, it will be eaten by the eater of the dead. Amit. Science and technology. Egyptians developed a form of writing called hieroglyphics. Hieroglyphics are signs or symbols that represented sounds or words. Hieroglyphics can be found all over Egypt, even on walls. Egyptians invented a form of paper called papyrus. This is made from the papyrus plant that grew near the Nile. A calendar was also invented by Egyptians. The first calendar that they invented was based on the phases of the moon. They found that this calendar was not accurate, so they developed another calendar that was based on the time between the rising of the North Star. This calendar had 365 days, like ours, 12 months and 30 days in each month. The other 5 days were for feasting and holidays. Fractions and whole numbers were also used by the ancient Egyptians. They used geometry to build their magnificent pyramids and to rebuild fields that were ruined by the annual flooding. Herbs and spices were also used for the body and for their mummifications. Government. Egypt's government was a theocracy. In a theocracy, the god or holy or sacred being is the supreme civil ruler. Egypt is ruled by the pharaoh. The pharaohs held unlimited power. They were the judge, high priests, and generals of the army. Egypt has a social class. From the highest power to the lowest, the order is the pharaoh, government officials, soldiers, scribes, merchants, artisans, farmers, and at the very bottom are the slaves. Egyptians can improve their status, but never do they really reach the upper classes. As I have mentioned, farmers only kept a portion of their crops, and this is a very small portion, because taxes were paid to the pharaoh through goods and labor. A labor fee was called a corvée. Citizens were drafted into the army. Many think that slaves would be working at monuments at the construction sites. Well, they're wrong. Slaves are not used in the construction of sacred monuments. Scientists found bones of Egyptian workers buried near sacred sites, so even the workers had a proper burial. The majority of the Egyptian population are peasants. These peasants worked the land of the Nile. The peasants had no voice, but they did not complain because it was backed by their religion. The mingling of religion and government made the ancient Egyptian culture successful. If the Egyptians didn't believe as much as they did in their religion, Egypt wouldn't have lasted as long as it did. Because of the Egyptian religion, lower classes did not rebel against the law, which was the pharaoh, who was considered a god. Egypt evolved from a dark-skinned court to a light-skinned court. This was so because of invasions and influences of foreign countries. When invaders from Nubia came, the rulers that took over were accepted by most Egyptians because they were restoring Egypt from the way it was before in the older days. From then on, rule was no longer by an Egyptian but by a foreigner. The ancient Egyptian civilization had an exact date of when it failed, or ended. Cleopatra was the last pharaoh of the Egyptian civilization. She embraced the Egyptian culture even though she was a Greek. She died of suicide by an asp in August 1230 BC. Her death caused the Egyptian empire to fall under Roman rule. Then Egypt was no more.